Hi, my name's Emily Rose Adams. Welcome to Presently Presents.
You can shape pieces however you want to, but obviously try to be careful because remember, you are the storyteller, you are the journalist. So it's your job to present however many sides there are to the argument without dragging yourself in and being seen to side with one particular individual.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Presently Presents. I'm thrilled to have a very distinguished guest on the show today whose illustrious career has spanned over 3 decades. She's worked for the likes of BBC World Service, BBC News Channel, BBC Radio 5, Radio 4, Sky News, Bloomberg, and loads more. And she's also got extensive experience working as an interviewer, public speaker, and facilitator. We're thrilled to have her on the show. She's also got her very own media company called Magnus Communications. Today's guest is Juliette Foster.
Hello, I didn't recognise myself in that introduction.
How does it feel hearing a list of all of your amazing achievements?
Do you know, it feels very, very strange because, you do these things, but you don't think about it. And then you come along and suddenly listen. It's like, oh my gosh, have I really done all that? Have I really been around on this earth for that long? But thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on and, reflecting on your 30-year career, which is incredible. What would you say inspired you from the very beginning to become a presenter, and how has the industry also evolved in that time?
There's a lot to pack in there, so I'll try to keep it simple. How did it all start? Well, it started at university, just from somebody making a very casual remark. I was in my final year, and by the way, my degree bears absolutely no relevance to how I subsequently earned a living, but let's not go there. And I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do because I went into college at 18 and you have one idea, then it changes and so on and so forth. And I had a boyfriend who was really good friends with this girl, and she had actually been offered a place on the radio journalism course, and she turned it down to go into retail. I think she managed to get some sort of a traineeship at one of the big high street brands. And it just sounded quite interesting. So I asked her, A, why she had done that and why she applied for the journalism thing in the very beginning. And it sounded interesting. So I guess it triggered it there. And then there was this other girl who had actually got a place as well on one of the courses at Falmouth. I don't know if it's still going strong. And I just thought, yeah, give this a go. And during the vacations, there was this very tiny community radio station in North London because that's where I grew up. And I used to work there. I wasn't paid much, but it didn't really matter because I had to show an interest. So that was my interest. And I applied for a course, a postgraduate course in London. It was called the London College of Communication, but I think it was the London College of Printing. It is now the London College of Communications. So that's where I trained, and the rest, as they say, is history. So that's how it all started, just from a chance remark. So I started off in radio and then worked my way through to television. And I actually got onto another course. This was to train as a television reporter. I actually won a place on the course, I should say, with 5 other people. Sadly, one of our group died last year, so the rest of us are still here. We're a lot older, dare I say, a bit wiser. And it's been an interesting time. And the industry has changed enormously because when I started out, as I said, I started in radio and we didn't have that much technology. The technology that is taken for granted now, it really was in its infancy. So we were using reel-to-reel machines. We used UHERs. And check that out on the internet. That's what I'd say to your viewers, UHER. And you'll see why my posture is not as good as it should be, because it was like carrying a case with blocks in it. But that was your reel-to-reel machine. You plugged in your microphone, you spoke to people, you then came back, you took the reels out, put them on a much bigger machine, and you edited. You edited with a white chinagraph pencil, a blade, and white sticky tape. And you could be sitting there, you'd have your headphones on, and you would cut out bits of tape. And according to the length of the tape, you put it around your neck, or you would have it on the side of your editing machine. You'd reinstate it if the edit hadn't worked. So all of that. And then when I went to the city, I was working for Bloomberg, and that's when I was introduced to digital, so to speak, because it was like, oh my gosh, I'm suddenly having to use computers, and I'm not the most technical person. But it was actually really challenging because you had to build a bulletin and they were feed points. So the way this worked was that I would come in to do the radio shift, and I would take over from the newsroom in Tokyo because the morning UK time was winding down time in Tokyo. So I'd keep it going to about 12 or 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Then I'd hand over to New York because that was their morning time. So it was just basically a combination of building bulletins that were business oriented, but also they had a world news interest too. And they went to a feeding point in New York because that was how we worked the system. So it would go out to everywhere in New York. That's how Michael Bloomberg structured it. And so it was a technology which really showed the sense of change, just the whole news gathering business, really. And I think for me, one of the interesting things that Bloomberg taught me was that you didn't really have to have reporters running around chasing things, chasing people, because you could interview people on the telephone. You could actually take the information that was coming in from the Bloomberg reporters. They were looking at business stories, but where you had the fusion between geopolitics and business, you could look at the geopolitics if that was your area of specialization, and you could build bulletins around that without having to rely on a reporter. So this really introduced me to the way that you can change the whole structure of news, because certainly when I was working as a television reporter, it was quite common to have your reporter, obviously, your sound man, your cameraman, and your spark. That doesn't happen anymore. And even when I was working in television, again, I saw this reduced state of the news gathering because I was often working with cameramen who didn't even need a sound man. They did everything. It was all built into their equipment. So I've seen the technological changes, but the actual approach to news gathering, I don't think that's changed. Certainly not what I've seen. That it's still the same thing. Check your sources, check the accuracy of the story, and make sure you tell that story in a way that people can get it. And if it gets them discussing it afterwards, you've done your job. But it's the technology that's witnessed the biggest change, definitely.
Absolutely. And I guess, as you said, the same sort of golden rules of journalism exist. But how different must that have been, doing everything in analog with these big machines? I know that initially that shock would have come where you thought, oh, computers, I think a lot of people felt that way in the 90s and early 2000s. How do I get my head around this? But really, in the long run, it seems to me, in my mind, gosh, this must be so much easier now when you can quickly use, Avid or Burley if you're doing radio, and you can just quickly snip your clips, get them out in a couple of minutes, job done. So how was that originally when you were sort of doing it all manually?
Do you know, you never thought about it because you still met your deadlines. You actually got very, very fast. The one thing which slightly held me back, and that was my vanity. I haven't got that now. I hold my hands up as proof. But I used to have really long nails. So I would sometimes get them trapped under the edit board. And I came close to slicing off the tips of my fingernails on more
Oh,
than one
wow.
occasion. But even then, you managed to work around it. You had a deadline to meet. That was all that mattered. And you picked up the speed. You never lost it. So people look at that technology and think, you guys worked on that. It's like, yes, we had no choice because that's what existed. You see, you have the choice about using the Ewer, the reel to reel, or you could use the Marances, which were the cassette recorders. So you would record things on cassette, but that took up a bit more time because then you would have to dump them from cassette to reel to reel. So it was actually easier just to work on the reel to reel machine. So you just acquired it. You just learned to be quick.
That's really interesting. And I guess, so you mentioned that your way in was to study and do courses. So you kind of, before you transitioned into TV, you took a course, which I think a lot of people these days feel like they don't have to do multiple courses and they can just sort of jump straight in and give it a go. And I have had quite a few Presently members actually sort of getting in touch and saying, do you think it's worth me taking a journalism course or a TV training? And I always say yes, because obviously you learn some fundamental skills. Is that something you would advise now? And if so, sort of what sort of length of time would you suggest is a good amount of time to get yourself ready before you can take that leap and go on camera?
Well, I would not disagree with you about the importance of doing a course. Now, let me stress that obviously I don't need to do the courses anymore, so I don't know what courses are out there. That's the first thing. But I would highly recommend people do this because I think it's a bit of a bugbear for me that there are a lot of people who feel, well, yeah, I can be a journalist, and they are a journalist by default, so to speak, because you've shot something on your telephone, you've edited it, And if you're lucky, it gets picked up and it gets shown somewhere. That does not make you a journalist. And I'll tell you why. I spent a year doing this. It wasn't a game for all of us. We were serious. We had to pay for our course. Yes, we got the place on the course, but you still had to pay because it was a postgraduate course. Again, in those days, I'm from the generation which if you sat your first degree, your BA, as I did, the state paid for it. Whereas today, obviously, you've got generations of young people who are paying for their education. We didn't have to, but if you wanted to do degrees, which followed that first one, postgraduate, whatever, you had to pay for it. So we had to pay for this one. And it does focus the mind because you can't afford to waste your own money. And you need to make sure that the education which you're getting is good. Now, I was lucky because the college that I went to was one of the leading colleges of the day, and it still is, as I understand it. It has to be good. Otherwise, why would Stanley Kubrick's widow have donated his archive to that college? Yeah. So it's worth it. We took a year doing our course, and it was brilliant because we learnt the basics of writing news cues, putting stories together. But the other important thing, and I had to do this again when I trained as a TV reporter, was that we had to understand how the law worked. In other words, how, as a journalist, the law impacts you. So we had to take exams. I had to pass my first set of exams as a radio reporter, pass them the second time around as a TV reporter. And yeah, you might feel very confident leaping in there, calling yourself a journalist because you've got some stuff up on YouTube, you've got lots and lots of followers, and okay, a news editor employs you in their newsroom. But do you know how to handle yourself? If you go into a court of law and if there are instructions, do you know what those instructions from the judge means? Do you know what it means about what you can and can't say? Do you understand the laws of contempt and defamation? Do you understand what it is with a closed court? Do you get all of that? If you do, then great. But what I would say is if you don't understand that, and if you don't respond when I tell you, read your McNays, it's been updated, then frankly, I think you really should do yourself a huge favour and go and sign on to a course, because you may think you know everything because, yeah, you've got Twitter, you've got Instagram, you've got all of these different platforms, and they're great to use. They can be an asset to your job. But if you're to be out there successful, you need to prove to news editors that you can be trusted. So in other words, if they send you out to cover a court case, you know exactly what to do. You are not going to do something which is going to land them and you in trouble. Because remember,
exactly.
Because if you've actually landed your newsroom in a really bad situation because you said the wrong thing, you didn't check your facts, or if you just basically followed your gut and your gut led you in the wrong direction, then that harms your reputation because you're seen as a loose cannon. You cannot be trusted. And news is a very precious commodity, particularly during a general election. This is the general election year. We don't know when it's going to happen, but you need to understand how the RPA works. Do you know what the RPA is? Representation of the People Act. Okay. Do you not know that if you're actually talking to the leading political parties, they all have to have equal airtime? Really important, because believe me, during an election, the news organizations are being very closely monitored. And if one person is seen to be given more airtime than somebody else, you've got the potential for a big fight on your hands. So you need to know how to operate if your news editor, if your news team are going to trust you, and if your producer is going to trust you. Because certainly if you're out there in the field with a producer, and they're a very experienced producer, they've got a big job on their hands. Okay, it's really important. They're hitting deadlines. They're taking instructions from base. They need to feel that their reporter can get on with the job, and that if they've got something useful to bring to the table, it is an exchange of equals. You cannot have an experienced producer hand-holding. That is not their job. So get the experience. That's my advice for what it's worth.
I couldn't agree more. And as someone who still works in newsrooms, I can confirm that, everything you said there is hugely important. And it can be, career ending even for some people when you make a pretty terrible mistake like that on air. So I can definitely vouch for that comment. So in terms of, you've got so much experience across radio, TV, what advice would you have while we're on the topic of starting your career for those who are aspiring TV presenters, journalists? How could they make their mark in the industry now? Because as we know, it is a hugely competitive field. Lots of people trying to get into it. What are the sort of top couple of things you would recommend?
Well, when I made the decision that this is what I wanted to do, I think for me, the key thing was working out which branch of news I wanted to specialize in. Now, in some ways, I regard myself as quite lucky because when I was growing up, okay, we used to watch the television a lot, but we consumed TV in a different way when I was a little girl compared to how people are consuming it now. What I always remember was that, we could be watching a film, myself and my siblings, on the television, and my mother would lean over and switch to BBC One at 9 o'clock for the 9 o'clock news. And of course, you don't really have any power in the household that you can turn around and say, we're going to switch the TV back to where it was, because there was only one television. So for half an hour, you'd be watching the news, but sort of counting down to the end so that you could switch back to the film. And in that sense, I grew up listening to the news and following events. I was watching documentaries when I was a kid because they interested me. And I suppose in a sense that that's one of the reasons why I do enjoy history, because you're looking at events, you're looking at the past and potentially extrapolating information from the past to understand how it influences the present. And that's what a lot of news stories are all about, because you can't look at, for example, the current crisis in the Middle East by focusing just on the present. Obviously, the present is important. But if you want to do the big deep dive, you have to go back into the past because a lot of the seeds were planted then. And I'm from that generation that grew up in watching the news coverage of Northern Ireland. So, yes, you have the generation of people who lived through the Troubles, and you have the generation of people such as myself who watched it from a distance. And then to actually go to Northern Ireland to actually cover some of the stories, I mean, for me, that was quite an interesting experience in itself. It also changed the way that I saw Northern Ireland, because the way that it was presented in the mainstream news was as an area, a part of the United Kingdom that was in constant conflict. But believe me, we often had days where we were running dry on stories to report because there just wasn't anything. There were lots of quiet days. But the whole area, the perception was that it was a place of constant violence, and it wasn't. Yes, of course, there were problems. No one was denying that. There were terrorist attacks, etc., etc. But let's be clear about this. This wasn't happening 24/7. So we have to put things into context. But yeah, I would say work out what you want to specialize in and ask yourself why. If you want to be a celebrity journalist, it's not my cup of tea, but there are some people who like it. Why do you want to be a celebrity journalist? And how can you be different if you're going to be a celebrity journalist? For me, the best type of celebrity journalism is the stuff which avoids the gush. I don't care if somebody's wearing a bright yellow dress or if they're dating somebody else, okay? There could be something really interesting in that person's career, okay? So what is it that makes them interesting, that has made them the great singer that they are today, or that has made them the great actor or actress that they are today? Yes, this is the Oscar nomination season. For me, what is so fascinating is the mechanics of selection. Why is it that you can get a film that nobody's ever heard of, and it's probably not a great film, but it gets nominated for an award? It might even go on to win the award, even though the smart money said no way. So if you want to specialize in certain areas of journalism, understand why and get to know them, be familiar with them. If you think that news journalism is your forte, do something really simple. Read the newspapers. You don't have to go to a newsagent and buy a physical copy. You can go online, but keep up to scratch with what is happening in the world. Okay, listen to the radio. Radio is so much broader today now than it was when I was young. You've got podcasts, and some of these podcasts are very specialist. There are some which are about the Middle East. There are some which are about whatever, but you can follow them. And if you really do feel in your heart of hearts, having done all of that, that this is what you want to do, then start. You can start in a very small way. You can start by putting together your own packages. You might, if you've got the chutzpah, talk to people. Experts love to share their opinions. People in think tanks, etc. They will give you that time of day. Obviously, tell them why you want to talk to them. And yeah, you can shape pieces however you want to, but obviously try to be careful, because remember, you are the storyteller, you are the journalist. So it's your job to present however many sides there are to the argument without dragging yourself in and being seen to side with one particular individual. There's so much technology around. You can actually set up your own podcast, okay? It could be directed at, if you're a student, it could be directed at people in the university. So use social media to promote it so that you can actually get people giving you their opinions. You know, you can set up your own YouTube channel. You can have some of the students on there. You can have some of the lecturers talking about whatever. You know, if you control it, you can manage it, then I think it shows that you're serious about this. And if you're like uber serious about this, then send the stuff out, okay? Contact newsrooms, find out who the news editors are. I mean, the great thing about a lot of the newspapers as well, the online publications, is that they do have spaces where they can actually interact with their viewers, okay, or their readers, okay? So, and also some of them, I mean, you might be one of those people who's into investigative journalism. So if you've actually stumbled on something and potentially it's quite a big story, but you need some extra helping hands, if you actually contact an investigative journalist via some of these pages, that's a really good way in, because yes, it's your story. You need some help taking it over the line, but you found it, and things like that can never go wrong. So use the technology and work out which branch of the media you want to specialize in. It's not a bad thing if you want to do celebrity journalism, okay? But as I said, try to be a bit blue sky thinking in terms of how you approach it and what you do with it. If you want to do news and current affairs, that's fine. But also, don't forget the arts. Arts journalism is a great field. I mean, if you love going to the theatre, if you love writing, authors like talking about their work. They like talking about the things that have influenced them, and it's a really good way to build up those relationships, and a great way to actually move into writing for arts publications, writing for publications like Variety, or just the arts pages on online publications. So you've got so much space to do so much, so go for it.
That's really great advice. Yeah, really, really great. And I think the point about showbiz is really interesting, because there are many people who I've met who love to do sort of celebrity style presenting, where it's either a celebrity news or it's, an interview on the red carpet. And actually, most of them that I know that do it are not trained journalists. And I always say to people who don't necessarily want to be a news journalist, but they love the idea of covering pop culture, celebrity, lifestyle, any of these areas as a presenter, I think it's relevant to study journalism or get some newsroom experience, even if you're just volunteering and helping out, because journalists have a way of always asking questions in their mind. And I noticed, for me, I started presenting before I became a journalist. And I feel like I became a much better presenter once I'd become a journalist and studied. And I feel like you can write your scripts. Your mind works in a different way. So to anyone listening and there's a lot of people actually that I've come across who really want to get into that field of the showbiz world, I really think it's worth, if you have the opportunity and the situation and the funds, to take a course, or to, as you say, just sort of use your mind in a way that a journalist would, read the news, and it really helps your overall presentation skills. There's so much to it. And I think too many people sort of in that world look at the news journalism people and think, well, that's boring. I don't want to do that. It's too serious for me, or it's too hard even. I've heard people say, oh, I wouldn't be able to do that. But I really think it can help just sort of make you a more well-rounded presenter.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think also thinking out the box with celebrities is always a good idea, because
totally,
yes, the red carpet's very fun and the junkets are very fun, and what you want is a good line. You're only with them for 2 minutes max, so you just want that headline, so your publication will get the hits.
Absolutely.
But sometimes when you go in a bit deep, or it's just something that's not sort of low level nonsense, basically, sometimes it's nice to get a bit of substance. And actually, I feel like these celebrities, you can see the relief on their face when they're not asked, oh, where's your dress from?
I totally agree. I totally agree. I mean, I remember interviewing the star of 12 Years a Slave, and I actually got into trouble with his PR people because you're allocated the time. And he was actually really interesting to talk to. And he'd actually starred in, it wasn't 12 Years a Slave, it was another novel. It was actually written by a Nigerian novelist and it was made into a film, etc. So he was on this high of 12 Years a Slave. But it was interesting talking to him about this book and the film, and going back to a time in Nigeria in the 1970s. His parents had lived through it, so what he was able to personally bring to the table, and then to talk to the author as well, because the author was initially a little bit, I felt that she was very disparaging. It's like, here we go, another interview. But then she actually began to change, and I could sense it, because it wasn't just, well, how do you feel about having all these stars being in your film? We actually talked about the book and how much of that book was translated into the film. Because, people think that a screenplay, it's always loyal to the book. Some aspects of it are loyal to the book, but then things are often cut away. So it's just interesting having those conversations with both of them, and just seeing the PR people twitching. It's like, oh, we've got all these other people who are waiting. And we just thought, no, they can wait, because this is actually really interesting. And it felt like a conversation. And we were happy because we actually got something out of these two participants, the star of the film and the author of the book. And it just felt as if we were leaving a really nice conversation. The fact that they said to us afterwards, thank you so much, and it was sincere as opposed to being very polite. And so I think you're absolutely correct, because there is more to people than just simply the role in the film and how beautifully they're dressed. So if you can actually, and that's a discipline, that if you know that you've got 2 minutes with somebody on the red carpet before they're moved on to the next journo, and you can get something, it stays in their mind, particularly if you get loads of hits on that clip. So if they're doing something else, they know you because you treated them like a human being. You weren't starstruck. So I totally agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's some really great advice. So before we sort of transition into what you've been doing in more recent years, what I'd like to know is, this is my own personal curiosity, because I work in news broadcasting and you work for some massive channels, obviously BBC World Service, BBC News, Sky News, Bloomberg. So you would have been sat in that hot seat for hours. How did you find that day to day? Did you find it sort of intense? Were there moments where you struggled with it, or did you take it all in your stride, or was it a sort of a mix of all of that?
I think it was probably a mix of all of that, but as you get used to it, you do start to take it in your stride. And it believe it or not, when you anchor, after a while it can feel very routine. Because remember what I said about places like Northern Ireland, the assumption, because of the way that it was presented on the news, was that this was a place where bad things were happening all the time. And that wasn't true. And, I spent nearly 5 years working at Bloomberg, and believe it or not, economies do not crash every single day. Believe me, if they did, you would know it. Okay. So a lot of the time when we were actually doing the economic stuff, it was like any other news day. Okay. And you know that it's like any other news day when you suddenly have to get very excited about a headline which tells you that the Italian bond on a particular local authority has actually dropped or risen on the yield or something bonkers. And you have to sort of turn that into something. But I mean, that sometimes it can be very pedestrian, but you get through it. But a day which threatens to be very quiet and, in news terms, uneventful, can suddenly change in different ways. You've got a terrible extreme 9/11, and let's hope that something like that is never ever repeated again in our lifetime, in somebody's lifetime. Looking at the business side of things, you then have the extremes of a banking crash. You don't want these things happening all the time, but for me, what's interesting are the responses. Okay, in the case of a banking crash, how do you heal the system and get it working again so that nobody gets caught in the blowback on this, that people aren't suddenly reduced to poverty or goodness knows what else because the system isn't working. Likewise, when you're actually trying to recover from a terrorist assault as grotesque as something like 9/11, it's scary. We all felt scared. I mean, I certainly felt terrified. We all did. So it's actually sending out messages that, okay, life still has to go on in spite of this tragedy. You can't be afraid. But at the same time, you know that there are things which are happening in the background. You may not even see that until there is an obvious manifestation. In other words, you suddenly find that the diplomacy It's very public. The language could be very aggressive. It could be threatening, whatever. Okay, there could be a military response, as we saw as the story unfolded. So it's all of these things. And when they happen, you just run with it. You're being driven by adrenaline. That's what happens. You are being driven by adrenaline, and the adrenaline splurge is no different for business news as it is for world news. Because believe me, I mean, we always found that when I was in the city, it was during the years of Alan Greenspan, and Alan Greenspan was the world's most powerful central bank governor. He was the boss of the US Federal Reserve. And it was phenomenal how just to actually watch how the markets, they would trade very, very cautiously because everybody wanted to know what Greenspan had to say. So, of course, when Greenspan had made the rate decision and he was actually going to explain it all, you'd have to sit there for hours. And this is what happened. I sat in the chair for hours, or it felt like hours, and he'd be talking. And you'd have to go through this stuff. And of course, there's lots of jargon. I do not have an economics background, but somehow you managed to follow it. We all managed to follow it. And then you're told, okay, we're going to break out of that because we're talking to a former central bank governor, or we're talking to XYZ, who's head of the bond division at JP Morgan or whatever. And you suddenly have to get a conversation going with them. Now, I don't have the technical knowledge of an economist, but I'm proud to say that in those situations, I had a conversation going. I could keep it going because you have what those years in the city taught me was that the days when you felt that you couldn't actually be involved in controlling your money, those days have gone. People were trading on stock markets and stuff, and they actually listened to Greenspan. Ordinary people. My mum and dad were listening to Greenspan, for goodness sake. The neighbours were listening to Greenspan. And if you're going to talk to somebody afterwards, you're going to dissect what he was saying, what he was getting at. You need to make sure that the conversation isn't technical, that yes, you're not demeaning that conversation because you've taken it down to brass tacks. But you have to understand who is listening, apart from the experts, who else is listening, and don't assume that because you've guided that conversation so that your next door neighbours, your parents' next door neighbours understand it, that the experts aren't listening. They're also listening because they're probably not even sure what he's been saying. But at least if you're actually talking to somebody who's got a pretty shrewd idea, that makes the conversation really interesting. So, yeah, your brain has to kind of recalibrate, just as it would, for example, if you were dealing with a human tragedy, a serious flood somewhere, an episode similar to 9/11 or whatever. Your brain just goes into it. And I guess that when the sense of what you've done hits you, it's when it's over, when you've handed things over to somebody else. And it's like, wow, you get hit with this incredible exhaustion because your brain hasn't been working in 5 gears. It's been working in 15 gears. You acquired 10 extra gears that you never even knew you had. And you walk into a situation and you just think, oh, it's going to be a very simple day. And then the day changes. It's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. But you learn to run with it. You learn to run with it. And then when it's over, you stand back from it. And sometimes when you're dealing with the very human stories, it's not easy on a very personal level. I have experienced that. But you keep going and you have to do what you have to do. And then when you leave that story, that's when you can start to reconnect, shall we say, with your human side. But when you're doing that story, you have to get on with the job because people expect you to pass the information. They expect you to talk to people and to flesh out that story so that they can walk away with a very rounded picture of what is going on.
Absolutely. And I think working in news in particular, as you say, it's a day that seems sort of totally calm. And in fact, you could say, well, it's quite a sort of quiet and weird news day today. 5 minutes later, it all comes crashing down and you're spinning 20 plates and it can be really sort of stressful. And I guess adrenaline, a wonderful drug that our body creates at times of needs, kicks in and sort of guides you through it, I guess, in those sort of breaking news and sort of traumatizing stories that you have to present. For me, I find, I don't know about you, but sort of doing research. So if I'm about to go on air with a story and you've got to interview someone, just reading as much as possible, taking it all in. So, the conversation flows naturally and you can, if the interview goes one way, you've got some other questions you can pull out the hat, that you've done your research. And also the importance of working with strong people behind the scenes, producers who are experienced and they can handle it. And because really, I think what a lot of people don't realize is when you're in front of the camera, there's a whole team of people, and they forget this sometimes, who are chucking in scripts last minute, putting in graphics, giving you instructions. If you're sat there in the hot seat, you don't know what's going on because you're not at the other side of a computer screen seeing it all come down. So you're having to trust them. And I guess for me, I sometimes feel that having a solid team makes the whole thing sort of way, way more comfortable if you're working on heavy stories like that, because you've got the trust there and you can just deliver it with confidence. Whereas if you're working with people who are brand new to the industry, perhaps are thrown in at the deep end and they're caught off guard, things can go wrong. And I think that as a presenter, that's the moment where you might feel sort of at your maximum levels of stress. I'm not sure if you've ever experienced that, but I certainly have.
Yeah, I do understand that, yes. And I think I've been in that situation before, and you used a really important word there, experience. Because if you're working with a producer who really is out of their depth and they don't know what they're doing, if you're sitting in a studio and you're live, you can't say to them, look, you need to do X, Y, Z. If you've got a good gallery team, your director and various others, they'll basically say, look, you have to do X, Y, Z in the meantime. So if there's a commercial break, the first thing that I'm going to say is, look, what's happening? Tell me what's going on. Oh, X, Y, Z, X, Y, Z. And you suddenly find yourself acting as a producer. And if you've got a really good gallery director, you're both coming at this from the same point. So it's like, okay, let's do X, Y, Z. You need to move the running order. So look, why don't you bring that package up? Okay, because that runs for about 4 or 5 minutes. That gives us a really nice window. You can do a hell of a lot in 4 or 5 minutes. Gives us a great window when we can do X, Y, Z. Okay, and I've been in that situation before, which is a bit weird because I'm only being paid to do the one job, but I'm not alone in having been in that situation, And it comes back to what you said as well about making sure that the people who are going to be in that hot seat, okay, in that gallery, that they can actually do the job. Because, it strikes me as a bit odd that if you want to anchor, there has to be that sense of trust that nobody's going to put you in that studio unless they feel that they can't trust you. And I totally agree. You'll get no argument from me on that point. And yet, you're happy to put an inexperienced producer in a gallery. You're putting them in charge of a director, the camera crews, because remember, a lot of the cameras are operated remotely, the sound desk, all of these people. And you're saying to somebody who is out of their depth, okay, you're not just in charge of that gallery, you're also in charge of the person who's sitting in the studio. And it just doesn't make sense. A good producer can make quick decisions. And all I need them to say to me is, okay, we're doing X, Y, Z. It hasn't come through yet. It's page 15 on the hard copy. So then you get the hard copy. You have to read it. But even when you're reading it, it shouldn't look as if it's being read. You have to somehow integrate the reading of the hard copy with your auto cue until the auto cue corrects. Then you just pick it up seamlessly. And if somebody says to you, okay, we're doing an interview with so-and-so, it may not have been anticipated originally, but it's happening and you have to run with it. Now, you might find that if there's some VT playing, that's when you can go onto your computer and you can quickly read up. But if you're smart, as you are, you try to do that reading in advance. In other words, you have to think ahead. So just because something is restricted to a 30-second read, do not assume that it will just remain as a 30-second read. It could be tempting enough for somebody to actually bring in another person, an interviewee, to elaborate on it, okay? Particularly if it's a very thin news day, we have to bring this in. I mean, I once remember anchoring a bulletin at Sky with the co-presenter who's also called Foster. He had the same name as my brother, in fact. And we had to interview the head of one of these teaching think tanks. And we knew that we were going to do this interview, but we were told, we could hear the instruction, O, X, Y, Z. We're meant to be doing an interview with so-and-so who's meant to be coming off this package. The package hasn't been cut. Guys, can you keep this conversation going for another 3 minutes? And then 3 minutes became another 2 minutes and so on and so forth. And we started off talking about one thing. And then we ended up having a conversation about the continental education system and how it compares to the UK. I have no idea how we kept it up, because I don't know anything about the French education system or the Italian education system. I've had zero experience of it, and neither had my co-presenter. But somehow we managed to keep it going. In this particular individual, they were quite happy to talk about it, because their beef was, well, actually, we need to actually borrow from continental Europe and whatever. So it started off with being a conversation about one thing specific to the UK education system, and then we somehow managed to widen it so that it embraced everything else. And then we moved on to whatever the next story was, because the VT was cut, the guest was lined up. So you often have situations like that, and you need to think about the possibility that a running order can change and you're not meant to talk to somebody about whatever, but just tuck it away in the back of the mind. And if you have any time in that preparation before you go on air, just do some reading about it. Or if not, okay, fine. Bring it up on your screen, go into your search mechanism, and whilst you're talking to that person, start off with the easiest question going, and they will wax lyrical about it. And whilst they're doing that, you can read, and it's like, okay, fine, but, okay, and you have a great conversation. And a good anchor will know how to do a couple of things. And again, it's experience, the ability to listen to your interviewee, to actually read what's coming up on your screen, and to listen to the gallery. That takes experience. People think, oh, anyone can do that. Well, I challenge you, go into a studio on a very busy news day and do it. And if you can do it brilliantly, then it's like, okay, I've been corrected. I'm willing to take my correction.
No, it takes a hell of a lot of practice. I tend to try and keep the volume, as a personal tip from me. Try and keep the volume at not the loudest levels, because when you are, as you say, juggling all of that in one go, just having them on a sort of quieter, you still need to hear, obviously, because if something crazy happens, you have to take the direction, but you don't want them. I see presenters with the volume waxed all the way up, and I think that's just making the whole thing way harder than it needs to be. If you've got good hearing, anyway.
Yeah, it depends if you've got good hearing.
Keep them quiet a little bit, because it can be quite overwhelming if you're not used to it.
Yeah, and the other thing as well is, well, obviously according to the story, but keep on smiling, because when you've got that sound button up, there can be chaos in that gallery. And so then somebody screams out, go into a commercial break. And it's like, okay, then. And then during that commercial break, you say, okay, what's going on? What's happening? Are we going to X, Y, Z? So just be aware that sometimes when it's a sea of calm, that's great. But 9.5 times out of 10, it isn't a sea of calm. And just be aware of the chaos, so that when they do go to the commercial break and they say to you, okay, this is coming up from point A to here, or whatever, it's like, okay, I'm ready for this. But these are tricks that you learn.
Yeah, definitely. And for those who are perhaps brand new to the industry, might not know that you have the difference of open talk back and closed talk back. And the closed talk back is when the director or the producer can speak directly to you, but you don't hear any of the other noise in the gallery. And open talk back is where you hear everything. So you hear the director saying, right, let's cue, the next visual or the next clip, and they're lining things up. So when you're on open talk back, you do hear a lot of what some would say is just general noise that you don't necessarily need to know. But I guess what can be helpful with open talk back that I found when I use it is you get an idea that something's happening before they tell you directly, this has happened. You hear, okay, this is going on. Okay, is that breaking? Is that confirmed? You might hear some of this. So then you're kind of, right, okay, something's going on. Let's get ready, which I think is one of the benefits if you can learn to use open talkback. A lot of places require you to be on it. Some are more flexible. I know. I think at Sky News you have to be on open.
I think so, but it's such a long time since I was there. It may well have changed.
I think I've got friends who are there now, and they're meant to be on open most of the time. So I think just learning to. And actually, when I did my first TV presenting course, one thing that we did was we practiced having an earpiece in and having someone just sort of shouting and cueing stuff, and it was really helpful, because the first time that you do that, and it's not just news or TV, it can be shopping TV. So for people who do QVC and things like that, you've got producers saying, right, we've got 20 left to sell, keep going, right? You're going to offer, and they are making you sort of push the sales aspect.
Yeah,
which is very
but they're very, very good as well. I think they're very, very good,
yeah.
because they just make it seem so seamless. I couldn't do it, but they are really good at what they do.
Absolutely. So mastering that earpiece is something that's really, really important. And I guess I'm trying to think of ways that you could practice, but perhaps, I don't know if you agree with this, but putting on a podcast really loud in one ear or something and practicing doing a speech and seeing if you can kind of take in what the podcast is saying at the time while you're delivering a script to camera or something like that. I think that could be a good way. If you don't have an opportunity to do it for real, just sort of learning that skill of multitasking can be so important for live TV. And also many conferences, which is, I guess, a good point for us to talk about how you pivoted into doing speaking, live conferences, sort of chairing panels. You're a master of all of this. You've got your own media company facilitating these kind of events. So obviously you had all the skills necessary because you had anchored and interviewed. So how did you find that process, sort of going on stage instead of being in front of the camera, being on stage, with real people, I guess, next to you? I guess now we do a lot of Zoom stuff, but how did you find that?
Do you know what? I actually found it good fun because, I don't know if I'm a frustrated actress in my heart of hearts or something, but I didn't find it that difficult when I did it because it's, you just walk in there and it's like, okay, so we're going to be talking about insurance. And you know that you've got a field of experts. Okay, they're not there to listen to me. It's not my area, but it's the people that I'm going to be talking to. And it's just something very, very simple because if you are if you're presenting a bulletin and it's the morning, you do two things. You say, "Good morning, my name's Juliette Foster." Okay, and you're in a studio, you don't see anybody. But when you're in a hall or a room or whatever, you say good morning and you smile. But I'm quite cheeky because if people are like, morning, morning, I just say, "Excuse me, am I deaf or something? Good morning, good morning." And people laugh. Laughter breaks things up, you know. I remember I was doing a conference on banking or something or other, and it was in March, and I said, "Good morning. And whilst I'm here, can I say Happy New Year to all of you?" And again, simple things like that. People laugh because it shows them that you have a sense of humour, they have a sense of humour too. And you can also interact with them. This is one of the really good ways that, breaking the ice initially, but a great way of interacting with people is trying to get them involved in the discussions. Now, that often boils down to the conference organisers. They want interactivity. So they use various tools. They can use something called Slido, or they may use variations of that because often people are quite shy about holding up their hand and taking a microphone. But you give people a choice, okay? And if somebody says, "I'm going to take a microphone," it's like, okay, fine. So I just say, "Oh, look, there's somebody, they're an exhibitionist like me." And they don't feel singled out. They love it, okay? It's a chance to actually say what they have to say. And that you take that question and say, "Okay, panel, what is your response to that?" But some people are very, very shy, so you can use Slido. The great thing about Slido or other platforms is that they can be curated because even though I basically say to people, "Look, we will take serious questions and don't get clever. Don't say anything obscene or don't say anything which is defamatory," because it's being curated. You can tell what the rude comments are and what the defamatory comments are, so you actually protect yourself. If I don't have anyone to curate it and I have to curate it myself, then that's okay because you can pretty much tell what is the serious question from the question which isn't serious, it isn't sincere, or the one which is just being hostile to somebody because you don't like the way they're dressed, or you can actually criticize what somebody is saying, but you can simply say, "Look, I disagree with this point about whatever," and you can put that to the person. But when you actually couch it in hostile language, "I disagree with this that you're saying, and this proves that you are ignorant and you are stupid," that is rude, and I will not tolerate bad manners because that's just not fair. But when you're doing these things, it feels a bit more personal because you're talking to people, they're talking to you. You have breaks. You have a break for coffee, you have a break for lunch, and you get to talk to people. Okay. And so I often find that once we've actually had the first coffee break, people they're so warm and they go back into a room, they're happy, and they give a lot more because they think, "Well, actually, it's not that bad and no one's going to laugh at me." There is no such thing as a bad, stupid question. There really isn't. It's often the most simple questions which are the humdingers because they can't be answered in 10 seconds or 20 seconds or 30 seconds. And those are the questions which I normally save, keep them up my sleeve and just say, okay, here's a really nasty question just for the end. And it's like, oh, crikey. But people love it. So I enjoy it because you're not, you know that you're talking to people. You can see your audience in front of you and you can joust with each other. It's good fun. And it's a way of actually humanizing very complex subjects. And often as well, I find that if I've interviewed somebody in a panel and they pop up a little bit later on in the audience, I recognize that face and I can look at them and say, they're smiling at me and they're like, yay, whatever. So you have that level of interactivity. It doesn't demean the subject. It doesn't do that at all, but it opens things up. It's warmth. You can have jokes in the appropriate places. You know where to have them. We had a great conference last year with one particular client. It was very funny because the location where we were doing one thing and one of the other halls was taken up by the police and all these chief constables and people were there. And so it's like, great, I can use this. And my way of using it was, okay, just the housekeeping, blah, 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 blah. By the way, at the end of this, we're going to have a party. Can I ask you all to be on your best behaviour because the Met are next door, okay? And we just don't want anybody being arrested because drunk and disorderly. We don't do bail here. And of course, people love that. They love that. It shows that you're human and they can relax. And it's a huge, huge learning curve. Once you relax people, you get so much out of them. And I love learning from the people that I deal with because they've just got amazing stories to tell.
And I guess part of the humor and there's light and shade throughout is part of your job as the facilitator to make sure the event runs smoothly. And there's a lot of pressure on you from the organizers. Sometimes it's a big corporate money. There's a lot of, big corporate company. There's a lot of money put into this. You've got the panelists who might be terrified of public speaking. And, that's a lot of pressure and perhaps they don't feel comfortable with being on stage because it's not, if you're not a broadcaster or you haven't worked in that field, it can be quite unnatural to just stand there in front of hundreds or thousands of people sometimes. So what are the other things apart from sort of, showing personality that you feel like you have to do to help make sure the event and everything sort of runs smoothly?
Homework. It's really important that you do your preparation because people think, oh, you just go on a stage and you just talk to people. We can all do that if we put our mind to it. But there's a big difference between having a conversation which is superficial as opposed to having a conversation which is meaningful. So, yes, I may have a client who just says, okay, look, we've spoken to all the panelists and they're happy to talk about this, that, and the other. So these are the questions which they're happy with. And it's like, okay, that's fine. But if there is a question which has an abbreviation in it, I need to know what that abbreviation is because it brings sense to the question. So read into the subject beforehand. Okay, it doesn't matter if everything's been done for you. Read up in advance. Also, learn about the people you're interviewing. It's called due diligence. So if I've got a panel with 10 people, and it's like, okay, because if I have to construct, I may have to construct the panel myself. I'm being told, okay, we're talking about X, Y, Z. You've got this number of people. It's like, okay, I need to know about these people. Here is the theme. How do you fit into the theme? So I'm actually I'm constructing questions because the other thing which I tend to do with some of my clients is that if we know that we're doing something in 4 weeks' time, it's like, okay, I think it would be really helpful if we meet before this event. And I'm not talking about 10 minutes or an hour before the event. I'm talking about meeting you guys 2 weeks before the event. So I want us to meet on Zoom so that we can talk about this theme because I need to know that I'm taking you in the right direction. So it's better that we do this now rather than me assume, okay, this is absolutely perfect. And when we actually do the event, it's a complete disaster because I'm going one way and you're going the other. Okay, so that's really important, doing that homework, because once you do that homework, you've read about the people you're interviewing, you've read about the subject they're talking about, you've drafted your questions, and you said, okay, would you feel happy doing this? For me, the fun is, once you know what everybody does, it's assembling the pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. It's like, okay, so if we kick it off with that person, now I'm pretty certain that they're going to say X, Y, Z, which means I can bring in this person to pick up on that, or they can both have the powwow. in the nicest possible way. And it's like, well, okay, then you just throw it open to the other panel. It's okay, they're talking about X, Y, Z. What's your take on that? Then you bring it back. You're in control, and everybody has a great time because they do not feel that their time has been wasted. I cannot stress enough. You must do your preparation. I absolutely hate it when I see people go on the stage, or they probably sort of do their preparation an hour beforehand or a couple of days beforehand. And it's like, yeah, it's a coast, it's a cruise. No, it's not. If you are interviewing a famous author or actor or actress, you would do your homework. So why can't you extend that same courtesy to somebody who may not be a household name, but they are respected in their field? They could be a respected medic. They could be a respected banker. They could be a respected insurance expert. They could be a respected engineer. What they do impacts on your life, okay? And you must respect them. They've given you their time. Nobody runs a company, a big company that's turning out however many millions of dollars or billions of dollars and employing so many thousands of people around the world by being an idiot. They got there because they're good at what they do. And you need to recognize that because they've given you the privilege of their time. So don't waste their time. If the boot was on the other foot, they'd be interviewing, they would know about you because they would actually carry out the due diligence. Extend it to them, work with them, okay? And because you've been very professional, you have reacted in the same way that they would react if they were talking to you. They appreciate that because their time has not been wasted. So don't cruise these things. Don't think it's that anyone can do it. You can't. If somebody asks you to chair a conference about concrete production, unless you understand the industry because you've worked in it, you know nothing about it. Okay, you're aware of what concrete is. You walk across it each day when you walk down the streets, the paving stones. Okay, you might live in a house with, of course, you've got the concrete holding the bricks together, whatever. But you don't understand the industry, not really. So do yourself a favor and the people you're talking to by reading. That's what these research tools are here for, the internet. It's a lot easier researching things now than when it was when I first started out. So there's no excuse for not doing the homework.
Definitely. And I think that's one of the key takeaways, I think, from our conversation is not just, broadcasting on TV or radio. It's live, all of it. The better, the more you research, the more confident you feel. And as you said at the start of when you described hosting these kind of events, you could have hundreds of people there who are experts in that field. How silly are you going to feel if you haven't spent that time researching? Because these people might know this industry inside out. And they probably all think, as people say, I could get up there and do that. So in their mind, if you haven't done your research and you're not asking good questions and you don't know what the person does and you can't sort of talk around those moments, those people in the audience will be thinking, why is this person being paid to do this? And I could do a much better job. And that's not my job, So I think it's just, as you say, it's so important. And it's not even for them. It's also for you. I just know, and it's the same as in broadcasting, when the auto cue drops out or something happens, the more you can ad lib and confidently, if you know a story, you can pick it up and you can just keep talking until you have to stop. And I think, in this industry, it's the best advice that anyone can ever be given is just do your research. It sounds boring, but actually, if you can get to a place where your mind is loving learning, which can happen, the more you research and the more you read, especially as a journalist, the more you write your own scripts and sort of read around a story, the more your brain gets used to sort of absorbing information. And actually it becomes a pleasure to research. And it's less like I didn't used to enjoy that process. And I used to find it really hard to retain information. I used to think, why is this such a drag? But now actually in learning scripts, I always found really difficult. But now after many years of practice, I find I don't know if something's developed in my brain, but I feel much more flexible in terms of learning. And, it's just, it becomes, interest. It's interest.
Absolutely. And, the key word there is flexibility because of what you do. Okay, you've interviewed me today, but you're going to be interviewing other people who have no connection whatsoever with the news industry. They could work in another branch of the media, whatever. But you have that flexibility that you can lock into their world. You do all the right things and it becomes a conversation. I know absolutely nothing about fish farming, But if I had to chair a conference about fish farming, you know what? I would actually learn about fish farming. And who knows, maybe it would develop enough of an interest that I might actually decide to go fishing, if not set up the farm, certainly go fishing, whatever. You're always, always learning. And it is a privilege and a pleasure to learn from other people. They're also learning from you as well. So it's a wonderful exchange of how things can be done. And I think some people often make the big mistake of just assuming, well, yeah, I can just cruise control it and I don't care because I'm getting however many thousands of pounds for this. But, if you're going to do a really bad job, then how dare you take the money? And by doing a bad job because you haven't bothered yourself, it just basically denigrates everything, every atom of effort that was put into organising this. And I work with very young producers who are events organisers, and they've been given a big responsibility. It's their job to make sure that this thing comes off smoothly, whatever event it is they've been asked to oversee. And you need to respect that. You really need to respect that because, this is the big one for them. And once they cut their teeth on this one, then they can move on to the next one. It gets a bit easier. And it's a privilege to work with them. But, if you can't be bothered, then everything that they've done is wasted. And frankly, you don't deserve to be paid.
No, I agree. And I guess it also benefits you in your social life as well, where you might go to a dinner party, you don't know anyone, but you've got the confidence and the skills to ask questions, be inquisitive, so when someone's explaining to you what they do for a living, you're taking it in rather than just nodding and going, oh yeah, okay, where can I find a drink, whatever. You're thinking, okay, that's interesting. And then you sort of can ask another question and you get to know that person. And
it's true.
So it sort of helps you in all aspects. I guess it's not just through work, which is what's fun about it as well.
I totally agree with you on that. It's funny because my husband can have a conversation and I'll say to him, oh, so what are they doing? What are they doing now? Or did you ask them about, no, that's a sort of nosy thing that you'd ask them. But you don't think it's nosy at all. It's just the way that your mind is trained,
Yeah.
and that's the thing, because, you could retire from journalism. You never stop being a journalist because there are certain skills that stay with you. It's asking questions. It's just the general interest in people. And, somebody could say, well, I'm a road sweeper. It's like, well, why are you embarrassed about that? Because, that's a really important job. If the roads aren't cleaned, they become petri dishes for disease.
Yeah.
It's like, actually, I never thought about it like that. It's like, well, okay, tell me about this job.
Yeah.
You're cleaning up the streets, but you must have found some things which it's like, no way is this going to get binned. It's too valuable. What's the most valuable thing you found? And if you actually start peeling back the layers, people share so much because you take them seriously, you respect them. And yeah, it's great fun.
Definitely. I'd like to know about, so your company, Magnus Communications, when did you set that up? Was it sort of a transition period? So you were doing lots of live hosting, so you thought, right, I'm going to set up a media company, or did the company come first?
No, it was just from a series of circumstances more than anything, because I was made redundant from Sky in 2006, and that's quite funny because I've been there for years. And frankly, I just thought, look, I can't do this anymore. And financially, it was actually good that I didn't leave, that I was made redundant, because I walked away with some money. And I thought, well, okay, that's great, because it means that I can take a little bit of time and work out what I want to do. And because I'd spent all these years working in newsrooms, I instinctively sort of ran towards newsrooms. And so I did that for a bit, but I just found that I couldn't shake off the same sensation of, this is okay, but I don't really feel that I'm fulfilling myself, not really. And I was being offered various assignments, chairing things, whatever, but I actually enjoyed them. I really enjoyed them because I found that when I was doing news, I was talking to people and I was hemmed into 3 minutes. And okay, you can get a lot out of people in 3 minutes, but it's actually very frustrating. 3 minutes is not really a huge amount of time. And to actually have half a day or a day where you're talking to people about different things. And again, I take it back to the history side of my personality. I like analysing things. And I think that's one of the reasons why I quite enjoy economics, even though I'm completely useless with the maths. It's analysing things. It's trying to understand why things work the way that they do, why people behave the way that they do when an economy is going one way or the other, that sort of stuff. And I do enjoy it so much because you're going beyond 3 minutes and you're exploring the different pieces of the subject. And as you see how things fit together, it's like, yeah, I really like this. This is working. I love it. So it came about really by accident because I was made redundant. I was trying to work out what to do next. And I started off on this stuff and found that I really enjoyed it. And I thought, you know what? That's where I'm going to be. That's where I'm going to be. I found that with some of the clients I work with, it's not just chairing events and things. They may say to me, well, actually, we're going to make an internal change doing XYZ. This is what we've come up with. Look at it as a journalist. What do you think? What does it do that is right? Where does it fall short? And again, it's just being the analyst and saying, okay, so what are you trying to say here? What is it you're trying to get across? Why are you saying it this way? Why can't you do it that way? You know? So I feel that I'm being stretched in all sorts of directions, which I absolutely enjoy. I love it. I love it. And you know what? I've had some really, really brilliant friendships that have come out of this as well. So, I've worked in various stations. When I was made redundant, I was working all over the place, but I was building up Magnus and doing all these other things. And I hooked in with people who are running production companies and things like this, and I work with them. So again, I actually was contacted by a lady from one particular company I know very well. And she just said, listen, can you do a podcast for us? Okay, what's it about? It's about the African insurance market. It's like, oops.
How much time would you need to prepare for that? Quite a long time.
Well, there was a lot of preparation involved, but from my end, it wasn't a huge amount of prep involved, but I was reading into it anyway. But what we did was that it was kind of divided up into different subjects. So one was the African insurance market, but looking at a very specific aspect of it. And the other, which was really interesting, was looking at the Lebanese insurance market, but looking at it specifically in relation to the explosion at the warehouse. If you remember, it was a few years ago, not that long ago, in fact. And it was really interesting talking to a Lebanese expert, a gentleman who lived in Beirut. And what made the discussion so interesting was that he said, okay, from where I'm sitting in my living room, I can actually look out towards the harbour and you can actually see the skeletal remains of this structure. And it was just really, really fascinating because it was looking at the difficulties of trying to assess the claims, the question about what you do with the site, and the fact that things have been pretty slow moving because then it feeds into the politics of Lebanon, the economic crisis, etc. And yeah, it just appeals because it fires up the brain. And when you think about it initially, you just think, okay, yeah, I just love it. I absolutely love it because it gets the brain firing. You have a conversation. Yes, they've told you this is what we're going to talk about. It's like, okay, fine. But you see, the great thing about it, and this is the other virtue of trying to read up about a subject in advance, is that somebody can give you a list of questions, but you don't have to stick to them because they say something really interesting and you can pick up on that. Yeah. And it just follows through. That's what a good conversation is all about. So yeah, it started off from redundancy. It just grew and I have never looked back.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of genres, I'm guessing you can cover most, to be honest, because you're so versatile and experienced. So what sort of conferences would you be speaking at, for instance?
Well, if I'm facilitating conferences, they can be financial. So we can talk about insurance, we can talk about banking. It could be what else is there? Also medical, NCDs, non-communicable diseases. There's one particular, I don't even feel comfortable referring to the charity as a client because I know the people who work there. We've actually become really good friends because I have incredible respect for what they're doing. And I do feel that as I've actually been part of their journey just to see how they've evolved and what they're doing, the connections they're making with the various health departments of various countries and what they're doing to fight NCDs, non-communicable diseases like cancer, Parkinson's, whatever. And yeah, it's just amazing to see the progress that they've made. So yes, it's looking at these, working with clients specialising in the medical field. Also, it's just very, very wide and varied. It really is. I mean, I have to go to Zimbabwe, again, looking at African insurance. And I think I can handle geopolitical things. I've done that before. I've been to Davos, and again, when you look at Davos, it's not just the economics; it's also the geopolitics. But I just regard myself as having that versatility because I started off in news and current affairs, and then I spent nearly 5 years working in business journalism, and I do not have an economics background. But the great thing that Michael Bloomberg said was, you know what? Anybody can understand an economy. You don't have to be an expert to understand it. And he was absolutely right. And I have never forgotten that. And that's something which I've always taken with me. So, yes, I think that that's one of the reasons why I've been able to do the financial and economic things because of my past at Bloomberg, but also as well, you can't really dissociate economics and finance from geopolitics. So that's where the news comes into it. I've covered most things. I haven't done fashion. Not yet, but there's a first time
Which
for
seems a
everything.
mistake because I love your outfit and your necklace.
That's very kind of you. The necklace, that was something which my mother gave to me. And I remember when my late father gave it to her, the lines aren't entirely straight because I was a little girl and I used to play with them. I'm actually
Oh,
surprised that the strings didn't break and the
yeah,
pearls were flying around over the floor. That didn't happen. So thank you so much for that. So
it's really
one day,
nice.
perhaps I'll be asked to interview somebody about fashion, which is a bit strange actually, because I don't really regard myself as a style guru or anything like that. But then having said that, I do have my favorite designers. And when you actually look at the attention to detail that goes into these clothes and
Mm.
the creativity of people, I mean, I couldn't do it. I'm just happy to wear the stuff.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So,
No, that would be a pretty awesome job to facilitate, wouldn't it?
that would be it would be that. So that's the, it's a bit like space, the final frontier, fashion, the final frontier, sort of moderating something for the world of fashion. It's like, what do you want me to talk about? Who am I talking to? So,
Maybe you should put some feelers out there.
thank Keith and Apples if you can hear me.
Yeah, that would be nice. I went to the Chanel exhibition on the weekend. That was amazing. Imagine facilitating a Chanel event. That would be epic.
Oh wow, yes, my friend went to that and I saw the pictures, and he's obviously not a very good friend because he didn't bother to find out how much the particular red dress I had my on actually
Oh,
cost.
priceless, probably.
Absolutely priceless. Yes, sadly, I do not have any Chanel in my wardrobe. That's one of the things I'd like to buy myself when I grow up, if I ever grow up. A
Wouldn't
traditional
we
Chanel
all?
suit.
Absolutely. Juliette, it's been amazing hearing all of the different aspects to your career and how it's evolved and changed. It's been so interesting for you over the years. So thank you so much for giving us such a, well, it was brief, really. I could have stayed on this call for much longer, asking you questions
Do you know, it
about
didn't
all the
feel
different
brief. It was just
elements.
such a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, it was really, really interesting. So thank you for giving us your time. For those who want to keep up to date with what you're doing, where are you online?
Oh, just type my name, Juliette Foster, Juliette Foster, and I'm bound to be floating around somewhere. You can find me. I have to update my website actually, so I had a word with my web designer. So that's my New Year's resolution, to get the ticker tape working because it went on strike. I'm not sure when it went on strike. So there are a few more blogs and things to add. It will all be done. But yeah, just type my name into Google and you'll find me. I'm terribly ashamed to admit there's so much work that has to be done on my website, but I have changed the photographs recently, so
Amazing.
which was pretty good fun. And
It looks great to me. So
oh, thank you, thank you. That was done probably a couple of years ago, so thank you so
Mhm,
much for that. But yeah, there's lots of things which are happening, so I'm very pleased about that.
mhm.
And who knows, maybe when I come back from Niagara Falls, no, not Niagara Falls, Victoria Falls, when I come back from Victoria Falls, I might even have a little present for you.
Oh,
Well, they might even do a miniature version of the Victoria Falls or something, so you can put it on your desk.
that would be nice. How lovely. I look forward to that.
I'll see what I can find.
That's very kind. Juliette, thank you so much. And let's catch up soon. Stay in touch.
Thank you so much. And thank you for such a wonderful, pleasant conversation. And may I say as well, you are a very, very, very good interviewer. So keep it up. You're doing all the right things.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That's really kind.
Thank you.